Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Today, we're going to do a little podcast today on the Homeless Romantic with my good friend Justin, Psychedelic Cello. What's going on, brother?
What's up, dude? I'd just like to say up top that I'm not a licensed therapist. We're just going to be doing some therapizing today from the perspective of a musician who understands depression and fucking keeps up to date with the world, and hence knows that there are some things lurking around the corner. Isn't that great? So we're going to talk about why we should be scared and then how to not be too scared. Does that sound like fun?
It sounds like a lot of fun. Frankly, people pay money to go to the amusement park or a haunted house to get scared. And I'm just happy that I can get scared for free here with you tonight. So take us into it.
Okay, and I should say, how well does your audience probably already know our connection, in that we are both vanners at certain points in life, and musicians, creatives, and vegans, or I'm a vegetarian. So there's been a lot of shared interests.
Yeah, both vagabonds and romantics, and both loving the environment, loving nature, loving music. Got a lot of conversations in on music. All the good things that humans can do, we definitely like-minded, let's say.
All right, so now that we've had some levity, let's jump into the deep end. So I would just like to list off the three biggest problems that came to mind today. This is not an exhaustive list, although it is quite exhausting to think about. So the first one is climate change. Obviously, we are at a point now where if you listen to the people who know, you know that if we were to stop everything that we're doing, more pollution, then there would still be irrevocable damage done to certain parts of the environment. They were already kind of on a roll. And we also know that that is not what's happening. In fact, New Zealand just reversed their ban on oil and gas exploration. So as individuals, sometimes we can comfort ourselves and say, oh, technology is going to fix it or whatever. But we're going to get into some details why that's not true in this, dispel that myth. And just generally, we are at a place where it is no longer just the fight to try to stop climate change. It's the fight to figure out how to live in an increasingly hot world, an increasingly environmentally hostile world. And this is the really big one, in increasingly displaced world that's going to be trying to find other places to live further north, or I guess there are some places further south that might work, but mostly further north. And that's going to cause issues with people. You scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds. Anybody who just wanted to live their life the way that they knew it in a more northerly place is going to find themselves inundated with immigrants who no longer have a home. So that's kind of on the horizon. And we also know that already we're seeing this rise in the right wing, more fascist aligned governments. We kind of have a growing kind of clash against the West, growing powers of like North Korea, Russia, and China, which really are not so subservient to the U.S. anymore. So we have these growing tensions around the world. The Middle East, as it's called here, which has long been a buffer between those two worlds, is now maybe at the brink of some of the most volatile conflict that we're going to have seen. And we have, major income inequality and, a huge housing crisis that is not going away as long as housing is a market. And that one also follows a simple logic. When there's markets, there's going to be people who are not able to make the market cut. This isn't like everybody could have a house in theory system. This is for sure a certain percentage of people won't make that cut system. And that is why we have homelessness today. So that's kind of the overall list of these things. But I want to delve deeper into the actual physics. So we're gonna use a paper that comes from what was it? I thought it was like the National Science, whatever, had funded or maybe funded this, whatever. Anyways, it's an article in the social sciences about the scaling of life in cities. However, this also relates to the very real concept of entropy, which is sort of the measurement of likely states of interaction in a given system. A little bit of a complex idea, but as we're going to see, basically because the Earth is finite and because we live in a culture that is determined to grow and consume at all costs, we're facing limitations that are going to go beyond technological advances to fix. So what's very interesting about this article, I don't know how easy it is to pull it up, Chris, or like if you can find the chart that shows the delays of progress. But basically, the first thing that they look at is they're interested in as cities grow, scale, and are using more resources. What happens? Is this a linear growth? Is this a sublinear growth? A superlinear growth? In systems dynamics, you might use the terms positive and negative feedback loops. Which things are going to, as you put more energy into the system, have more problems to overcome versus which things, the more energy you put in, it's actually easier. Excuse me. And so they find, using a lot of math and stuff, that cities follow super linear growth trends. So that means that the growth will hit this asymptotic burnout point where the amount of energy that you need to sustain the growth essentially approaches infinity, and you reach this endpoint where there is you're not capable of getting more out of that system. And they also have this graph here which shows kind of like what happens with intervention. So you basically have this line going up, and you can view the top of the chart as being where there's too much energy need for what we can do. And as the line goes up, it might be start approaching this asymptotic burnout, but then these dotted lines will represent a technological advancement that delays the growth. However, the line is still going up over time. And what's more, because of that, the time intervals needed for the technological growth get shorter and shorter. And so, we now have here data and proof that it's, from a basically statistical and mathematical perspective, it's going to be impossible to technology our way out of climate disaster unless that technology is coupled with major changes to how we're approaching how we're living. And it's not all doom and gloom, because the asymptotic burnout is just one thing that can happen, but there is possibility for homeostatic awakening, as one paper called it. And that's kind of what we more or less are going to need to be able to find. What people neglect to think about is that you can't just fix something on one part of the earth and then the rest of the earth is going to be fine. When the first world changes their laws to be able to, reduce their emissions or whatever, the burden of doing the dirtier emissions goes to countries in the global south. It gets offloaded, but it doesn't actually reduce the actual climate change effects in the world at large. And also, making something more efficient doesn't mean that the overall energy use of a system goes down either, because if you increase efficiency, you're going to be tempted to want to get more than you were getting before. Hence, your actual energy consumption is going to keep going up. So this sort of, we could call it entropic growth, where as we try to keep putting heat into the system in order to, create our different things, to grow, to be able to process the non-natural state of making clothing and little gadgets and things like that, the increase of heat to the system means that there's a lot more collisions that are happening between particles. And it means that increasing collisions means that we are more quickly going to reach a state of perceived homogeneity where stuff is spread out. Basically what I'm describing is how, being hot here is going to affect here. And also how there's a limited amount of heat we can increase on Earth before we reach places where it's true saturation. So I just wanted to start the conversation by making sure that we can look clearly at the problem. Do you have something on to add, Chris?
I mean, and we know for sure. I mean, you're talking about exponential growth, year over year, doubling each and every time, to where, humanity's a heat engine, right? So even if we invent something to stop, you're saying the curve is still going upwards.
Yeah, like literally, and this is why I bring up entropy. Literally, the way that the physics works is that the energy in a system is going to trend towards dissipation. And so when we want to cool a house in the desert, where the heat is very, the particles in the air are very active because it's warm, they're going everywhere. If you want to reduce that activity in your home, you're basically trying to lower the entropy of the room to make it a less likely state of those particles' activity, to be colder when outside there's more activity. In order to do that, you have to produce an amount of heat that's greater than the heat that you're saving, because there's also energy loss with your AC system. So this is why, like, the window ACs, they're hot on the outside. Or this is why other types of AC systems are going to be on the outside of buildings or on the roofs of buildings. They're generating a lot of heat. So you can think, oh, we're actually compounding the problem if in these desert places where people live, and then they have these big single family houses that all need to be cooled excessively, they're literally making the area even hotter than it was before. Yeah. And these are the sort of, exponential trends that are not thought out, are not based in grounded sort of like natural self-preservation based on the science. It's based on something a lot worse.
I mean, there are something, maybe you've heard something with certain technologies that might actually just solve the whole process in general, like desalinization.
Impossible. Describe how that would work.
Or to harness the energy of things that already exist, like waves, gravity. I mean, they already do this to some extent with certain inventions and stuff, but they have not ever brought them up to scale. And I don't know if they could, but let's just say that you harnessed every ounce of energy that exists, methane, gas, chemical, anything that's a natural process that's just like a waterfall. You get in between it and its process and then harness that energy. Still, I think humanity is too much of a heat engine. Especially, humanity doesn't want to just survive. It wants to thrive and create things that have negligible value for humanity.
Yeah, and what's important in the example that you give, and why even transitioning to renewable energy isn't enough, is that renewable or not, an increase in energy consumption leads to much, much higher heat index. So it certainly is a lot worse when there's a lot of extra carbon and other greenhouse gases. Basically, when radiation hits the Earth from the sun, eventually it'll all dissipate out into space because of that thing that I was just saying about the tendency of particles to do that. So ultimately, the Earth doesn't retain any heat. What we're talking about with the dangers of global warming is actually specifically just a problem of the Earth retaining heat for so long that it builds up, and that it takes so long to exit the Earth that it becomes an unlivable place for us. So that certainly compounds the issue, but the issue doesn't go away just because you have a more efficient way of generating energy. If you're using that energy to be producing things, you're still going to run out of raw materials, and you're still going to be producing a ton of extra heat that, unless you can figure out a quick way to get out of the system, there's points that cap out. The thing is that no matter how big the energy, the potential energy, like let's say we were able to fully utilize the Earth's geothermal energy. There's a ton of magma down beneath the surface. Let's say we're even able to do it without something somehow compromising the core spinning, which the magnetism from provides necessary protection from the sun's radiation that otherwise, we wouldn't be able to exist without. There is still a definite number. There's a definite finite number, something way closer to zero than to infinity, of megajoules that can be produced, and over a period of time. So it really is and of course, the techno solutionists among us, or those who are obsessed with progress for progress sake on technical frontiers alone, it's like, oh, this is why they start to think, oh, well, we can go to other planets, whatever. The reality is other planets and stars are so ridiculously far away that the energy needs to be able to colonize like that are never going to be made up for by the energy that you can gain from being in that system, at least from what we know. And again, it's not even what's theoretically possible, it's what's actually possible in a certain time scale. So maybe it is possible to make a certain development that could stave off this disaster, but it either won't happen in time to, that disaster still happens anyway, or it's able to stave off that disaster, but then it still comes back later. And a great example of this that I love is how in New York and London, other big cities, there was a problem. You've probably heard of this at the end of the 19th century, where there was so many people, there were so many horse-drawn carriages that there was like horse shit everywhere, and people literally did not know what to do about this problem. It was too much to deal with, and there was no good solution that came. Basically, it was just a problem that got shelved, because when the electric automobile came out, it didn't poop, or at least in the same way. So the car did not solve the fundamental problem that transportation creates emissions that harms the environment. Cars were a technological advancement that was able to delay that environmental effect. But now we're at a place where we're starting to see that as well. And so you can jump to the next innovation. Oh, okay, so we're going to get electric cars. Now, first of all, half of the energy used to make a car, or that a car will use in its lifetime, is made in the manufacturing process. So first of all, even in a best case scenario, electric vehicles are only saving half of the emissions. The production scale still matters here, right? And also, where is the electricity coming from that's ultimately going into those cars? If it's not from renewable energy, then we've basically offloaded the guilt of using fossil fuels onto the grid system that's responsible for getting that electricity into our cars. So I really want to hone this point home, because I was talking to a techno-libertarian sort of minded friend of mine yesterday, and it hadn't even occurred to him, the climate migration issue. And it's like, bro, you got to get on board with what's about to happen, because if you think that if there's immigration problems now, I mean, it is nothing compared to what we're going to see in 10, 15, 20 years. And you can mark my words on that, because this is a prediction that's not coming from, oh, I dreamed it up. This is a prediction coming from a very logical two-step sequence about what climate scientists say is going to happen regardless of change, and then the fact that we don't see that change happening, especially not on the scale enough. And this is where the failure of public education to actually make people understand math and statistics, because the fact that this is all BS is so easy to determine when you have access to data and you can look at numbers and you can see the orders of magnitude difference between the energy that can be saved by whatever climate agreement and the increased energy that is going to be used regardless as industries try to grow. And we're kind of, again, past the point where we can fix this. We have to learn to live with it.
Yeah.
I just want to stress this. We're going to get to the fun part, promise, but really we have to understand it's not that optimistic.
An average of 21.5 million people are forced from their homes globally due to natural disasters, which are being exacerbated by climate change. Scientists predict this number will grow as the planet gets hotter, with 143 million people likely to be displaced by rising seas, drought, searing temperatures, and other climate catastrophes over the next 30 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's just right there. And you can ignore it. I mean, I understand the mind's, you want it to be able to be like, okay, well, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe, it's overblown. I'm sure people are fixing it. I mean, whatever gets you through the day to a point. But if it's going to cloud your ability to evaluate what's actually happening and what, those little things that can add up in your life, who you vote for, what sort of shopping habits that you get, what your long-term goals are. I think that it is possible. I'm not talking about shopping ethically per se. I'm just saying, like, it's possible to, like, when I read Settlers, that's the kind of shortened title, but it's the mythology of the white proletariat, the Marxist historical book from the 80s, I think, written by a Japanese American, and in it he sort of goes over how there were similar problems to what's happening today in America with housing in the old world around the 1600s, and the first people to come to the Americas from Europe to settle were middle class people who, they were never going to afford land, where, it had all been divvied up already. And there's a lot less land in Europe per country than there is in North America. And so they came over, they were able to get this land. The next 700 years, people like to blame, it was influenza. It's like, dude, influenza is the only reason why their genocide campaign succeeded to the level it did. But make no mistake that they had a genocide campaign. They wanted to be able to give themselves this absurd amount of land that wasn't available in the old country. And for a while, there was actually this sort of like quasi individual socialist thing where, like, certain people in certain groups, for a while, you'd be able to apprentice for a skill, become a master in that skill, and then own your own labor value as an independent merchant working person. And so this might already be ringing, resonance with you as you hear these. I read these things and I was like, oh, so that's where my desire to, like, own a nice piece of land someday comes from. Oh, so that's where, like, that's where the mythology around being your own boss comes from. I mean, that is why the title is the white proletariat, the mythology of the white proletariat. The idea that you can be a mini lord and have your little land. This is the mythology that drove people from Europe, who then started calling themselves white. It's a really good reminder. There was not white people before they needed to racialize. People in Europe hated each other, and they were killing each other based off national lines. So there was no white until they needed there to be. But so for the sake of us needing there to be, so white people coming over, in order to exact this mythology, this idea that they can have access to something, and it's something that can only happen because of stolen shit and killing people, so that there's fewer people to need that stuff and all that crap. So reading Settlers was really profound for me in a number of ways. But yes, in the beginning stages, looking at the early ideas of people who came to America, it really did reset my thinking, and it made me feel like, instead of van life being this thing that I'm going to do until maybe I can own land someday, maybe it's just what I do. Maybe it's not such a big deal. Maybe I don't need my own piece of land that I'm going to, like, say is exclusively mine. So I do think it's possible to shift your mindset as an individual, where you need less to be happy. You literally are not basing your happiness off of the consumerist mindset. And I think that just like any idea, and like atheism or anarchism, these are ideas that they do kind of spread slowly. They do require a little more intellect to grapple with. You can't just be passively fed an atheist or nihilist worldview, at least with any robust philosophical standing. You have to actually engage with it. But that doesn't mean that it's, not possible that slowly people can just be less and less bought in, I guess pun intended, to the consumerist mindset that is ultimately, regardless of how efficient we're able to make it, a process that is going to bubble over in a way that we aren't going to be able to keep up with. And it's not just me saying, oh, maybe this will happen moon, or like, oh, it's so bad that like, this is the end result that could be. No. This is the likely path as of right now.
Yeah.
This is like kind of what you just have to expect to be happening. And so I think now might be the right time to be able to take a step into some optimistic nihilist philosophy so that we can bring ourselves back up from the doom and gloom. I want through this entire conversation that we optimistic nihilism. Okay, this is great. The fact that you already think that there's a contradiction there is awesome, because that means that we're going to be able to learn today. So how familiar are you with philosophical nihilism? Nietzsche and even the related existentialists and figures like Camus and whatnot?
A little bit. To take us as an introduction, let's say we don't know.
All right. So nihilism, and actually there is a great podcast that just got posted with Alex O'Connor and okay, I'm blanking on it because I only just started seeing his videos pop up, but having a conversation with somebody else who's well versed in philosophy and is making videos, and they're talking about nihilism. So if you do want the even deeper go there, because I'm gonna talk with a little bit more certainty, so people who actually really know might think that I'm reducing a little bit. But basically, philosophical nihilism is founded on a belief that there is not intrinsic meaning to the world. So this is in contrast to especially Christian beliefs that believe that our purpose here is from God and related to God and has a clear and set purpose that's independent from our own desires and stuff. And this is also in contrast even to some, like liberal democracy and the ideas of, intrinsic progress and the system working out that sort of underlie liberal thinking. Nihilism is just saying there's none of that. Like how in space-time, it turned out that there wasn't, as Newton thought, fixed time or fixed space. These things are merely relative. You're only going fast relative to something else. You're only here relative to something there. And so too, the philosophy pretty much goes, we're here by course of accident and some cosmological rules that the universe seems to be very good at following for whatever reason. The fact that we can model so much of what happens with the universe mathematically is astounding, really. Very few things can reduce so clearly and still mean something and not just be some sort of vague metaphor for what's going on. So I think that that's all very, very interesting. And here's where the nihilism gets split, because that's the most foundational sort of axiom of nihilism from which everything else is built, that there is no intrinsic meaning. But where you go with that can go a lot of different ways. And a lot of people use the word nihilism as a sort of synonym for the word depression or hopelessness. And there is a branch of nihilism like that. People who don't think anyone should be born, that life is just total suffering. And to be honest, these people are a bummer to read. Not only because they're a walking contradiction for not just having, off themselves to begin with, if they feel that badly about it, but because almost by spewing in it longer, you've given it, you've added to it. You didn't even need to add to it, to the way that you've added this disgusting element to the reality that you're so disgusted by. Now, this is my own personal reaction to it. So let's shift over and talk about optimistic nihilism. Again, there's a lot else going on, but the central idea behind optimistic nihilism, and it is related to the idea of existentialism or existential nihilism, where you can find meaning in the universe, but it's not intrinsically there. And I think that this can be a really nice way to decouple ourselves from the stories we've been told and the emotions, the knee-jerk emotions we might feel about expectations, if we do two things. One is we recognize the duality of the importance of the things that we care about and the non-importance of the things that we care about. So the importance of the things that we care about is, look, if you're not taking care of your health, if you're not pursuing the interests that you care about, if you're around toxic people you don't want to be around, you can't just suck it up. You should try to change that environment. Your interest in that sort of circumstance are very important to you subjectively, because you could just be dead and then it wouldn't matter. But if you're alive, then you have things you care about. However, not only are you just one person, but life is like a weird accident. You know, we aren't sure. We've never seen any evidence of life starting again on Earth. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but the fact that everything is related, has a common ancestor, is kind of bizarre, because no new life that is totally distinct in lineage from the earliest bacteria predecessors on Earth has ever, to our knowledge, been started. Everything's related. And I even saw an interesting hypothesis put forth by Kurzgesagt, the channel, that perhaps the early, because if you talk to people who know the fossil record, I mean, basically as early as we have evidence for Earth existing, there's these small fossilized bits of life that we have. I mean, it seems to have been on Earth basically from the beginning. And so Kurzgesaggt's put forth the idea that, if you really reverse the time engine of the universe, then like 10 billion years ago, which is like double the length of the time Earth's been around, the entire universe could have basically been a habitable zone of like, 0 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And perhaps in such a vast amount of stuff happening in that temperate condition, there was enough randomness that something that causes the self-replicating thing that is life got kicked off, and then it was just there already, seated in Earth. So this is kind of interesting to think about. Like, life is so freakishly unusual, and especially the more you learn about how the universe works in terms of conservation of matter, conservation of energy, but also the existence for every particle and antiparticle, and that within fields there's constantly particles and antiparticle pairs popping in and out of existence, because the overall energy of the system is conserved. So it actually doesn't break any rules for matter and antimatter to be created and destroyed. I mean, the fact that there's matter left is interesting to physicists to begin with, because it means that there was some thing that happened that it got disconnected from the antimatter pair and didn't just annihilate and still exists. And in a very similar way, we as life seem to be existing on this north side of the wave. There's a wave equation that describes our universe, and it's like we're living just in this part of it. What caused that? It's just, so this is all kind of a side tangent, but what I want to get at is that life is very unusual. There may not be a lot of it out there, and once we're all gone, it might just be gone. And so it's not that important in the end as well. So optimistic nihilism. So where can we go from there? The second thing that I think is really cool is when you start to try to look at humans through a biological lens. So when you're trying to like take care of a monkey or a cat, if you get a cat, it helps to look up. I mean, a lot of it's common knowledge. It helps to look up what cats like. For all of the individual and unique snowflake personalities of each individual cat, you can just bet that they're going to have a hunting instinct, that they're going to need to take naps, that they're going to need to feel like they have places that they can go and hide and be completely alone and feel safe, that in every room there's like a platform that's like a clear spot for them, and then maybe even it changes. If you can do these things for your cat psychologically is faring much better, and you're going to have it's going to be healthier, and you're going to feel a better bond with it. Why don't we do this with humans? It's complicated, but if you if you do it, oh God, having a moment. If you do it with humans, here's the thing: what do humans need? It's actually also pretty well known. We are social animals, so we need to have a sense of community and a sense of purpose towards that community, that we feel valued and make a positive contribution. Health, via diet and exercise, hugely important, because we know that so much food, so much of what your podcast talk about is how much our food is kind of screwing us over. So we, you're already very familiar with that.
Yeah.
You need something to do physically where you actually feel the rewards of that effort. And this relates to Marx's theory of labor alienation, but we don't have to go into that now, as you've covered Marxism before. But yeah, so like, what is that? Like 6 things? I mean, it's not actually that complicated for a human to be happy, but it does depend on certain environmental factors and a knowledge of oneself to be able, because one thing I like to say is that if there's individual responsibility for anything, it's for living your best life. No one else is going to care about that as much as you. And again, in the grand scheme, it does not matter what you choose. So this is where optimistic nihilism becomes a freeing tool. Because let's say you do think things matter, you think God exists, you think you need to get married to this person of, particular social standing, usually the opposite sex. And, maybe you find yourself in a marriage that's not so good. Maybe you find yourself in a job that's not so good. Maybe you find yourself not allowing yourself to be able to have a worldview where you're not freaked out about climate change and the fact that there is no God who's ultimately going to take care of us, to be able to live your life in a way where that's okay and you're still living your life. I mean, that is destructive, because you're not going to be able to, like, first principles your way through those 6 things to be able to live your happy life. But I do think that there's a way to do it. And if there is a problem, there's a traceable problem. Maybe it's some sort of biochemical thing. Maybe it's a dietary thing. Maybe it's an environmental thing and the family that you have to live with, or the area that you're currently having to live in. It's not that these are not sometimes even insurmountable problems. I mean, fuck, if I were giving this advice to someone in Gaza, you know what I'm saying? But like, but as far as people who are living in a relative stability within their country, but again, with this kind of background of extreme instability, the way that we're going to be able to manage that is to be able to make sure that we are doing those things for ourselves, making the environment better for other people to be able to do those things, and just doing that the best that we can until we die. Because that is really the only way to be both informed as possible and as happy as possible. I mean, that is, I feel like I've been trying to just be like super logical through this whole conversation. That's the way you can logic yourself to the best way to approach all of this, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Hooray, we made it to the main thesis of the video.
Nice. So is this a thing?
So what do you think of all that?
I like this concept. Life means nothing, and so you should do something nice with it. Like, I always felt that it's fun to make art out of garbage. And if life is just a collection of garbage, why not pick it up and make something nice out of it? That's my thing. So I love this idea. So, but yeah, I love listening to you talk. You got a nice way of looking at the world, and you've got some really good insight into a lot of different topics. So what else are we talking about?
Thanks. All right. Well, I have a couple of stories we can go into. Did you have news stories you wanted to talk about?
Well, not so much. I wanted to also just talk about what you were talking about. We're talking about humanity using up all its energy, stretching itself a little bit too far in a direction where it won't be able to, handle its consumption. And I wrote an article this week where I talked about, oil reserves are estimated to be depleted by 2052. Natural gas reserves may only last till about 2060. Coal reserves are could potentially last until 2090. Some studies suggest that rare minerals and metals like indium tin oxide for touchscreens could be depleted as early as 2026. Phosphorus, which is essential for food production, may run out within 50 to 100 years. And of course, soil is being depleted at an amazing rate. So there you go. I mean, nearly 33% of the planet's arable land has been lost to erosion or pollution in the last 40 years. 33%. That's 1/3, almost a third. But you know what I mean? So this is a big part of it. You throw in the microplastics, you got yourself a disastrous possibility.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people do think, if that were true, what are we going to do? And that's kind of like the place that I assume a lot of people are at right now, and that hopefully my approach of you gotta smack yourself around. You gotta be like, holy shit, this is a reason to live, and holy shit, what the fuck's going on over there? Like, and then you kind of settle in the middle, and you're like, all right, I gotta keep an eye on what's going over there while I do my best to try to do this. And for me, it's music. I just get such a rush from it. And maybe it's not so clear cut for everybody, but I mean, screw it, dude. Like, if you're worried, like, oh, is it okay that I also smoke weed? Is it okay that I like video games? Is it okay that, like, I kind of want to curl up and escape from the world? It's like, yes.
Am I masturbating
it's all
too
good,
much?
Man, because it doesn't matter.
Oh, you're not masturbating too much.
Yeah, none of that stuff really matters. Oh, dude, I have to share my absolute favorite Bible verse with you. I know that you're going to think that I'm crazy for even having such a thing.
I actually,
but
today,
if you ever,
I'll share mine with you.
Oh, what's yours?
Well, somebody wrote me and they said some bullshit about something where they were like way off base with their politics and with their data, some non-scientific, very unserious people. And then I went over to his profile and he had a little Bible quote there, and I said, wow, what kind of Bible quote can this guy have? And now I forget where it is. But it was something like, from dust, he was talking about food, and it's like, from dust we come from, and dust we shall return, and stuff. And I thought, well, that's pretty cryptic.
Okay, he's probably, I think you're talking about it. I think you're also talking about Ecclesiastes, bro. I think it's the same one.
It's like 6:9 or something.
69, nice.
Something like that.
Another thing that I pithily love. So up until recently, I was kind of a centrist on religion, where I was like, look, if it's good for people, or whatever, it helps them, it's fine. Christ seems to be this figure that taught love, and was basically a socialist, and it's like, okay, so whatever, it's groovy. And I've been watching these videos coming out by this channel called Mind Shift. The guy's name is Brandon, and dude, he is so careful in all his videos to only use the source material in his arguments. He actually does a series called Secular Bible Study as well, where he goes through each book and talks about it in literary context, contradictions and stuff, which is always juicy. And, most people talk about religion in a bit of an abstract way. The fact that he is constantly pulling receipts, constantly doing diatribes where you like say, oh, I know people might say this, but it's point, not a good argument because of this. It's so satisfying to listen to. There are so many problematic verses in the Bible. My favorite of the problematic verses is Jesus not only did not come to bring love, he said it. His own words, do not mistake that I have come to bring peace. I've come to bring the sword. And like, he's there to help the Jews fucking fight. And I mean, when you actually look into the historical, evidence for how the writings were constructed over time, I mean, it's just very, very clear that this is sort of like somebody's blog getting updated, and then you're trying to make the story match somewhere else, and you shoehorn it in, and ultimately the religion's not even about it having made sense. So it doesn't really matter if it does. But here's Ecclesiastes 9. I feel like I could fucking put this up on the wall or something. This is the best part. The whole thing is actually pretty good, but go, eat your food with gladness, drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun, all your meaningless days. For this is your lot in life and in your toilsome labor under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead, where you are going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom.
Yeah.
Fuck it if that's not the most optimistic, nihilistic shit you've ever heard.
Yeah, I heard...
Right in the middle of a book of...
I did. I heard that in a movie one time. It was Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. Yeah, there's whatever your hand finds to do, do it gladly, because there's no knowledge, wisdom, or truth in the grave. That's a good thing. Like, this is like, you don't even have to be religious to respect this as being like good country songwriting from like the 50s or something. Like, it's on par with any other touching cultural, thing. And that's storytelling, the original opiate.
And so here's an argument that, tell me truly if there's a logical hole in this. So in Hassan's video, do you remember Jordan Peterson, which was genuinely a helpful video for me, because it took me like 2 or 3 years to fully understand leftist problem with Jordan Peterson, because I started off his target demographics. I was just, he's just a guy, whatever. So he goes over all the fucking Hitler memes and all this stuff. And somebody in the comments was like, well, what if you just wanted to listen to him for the self-help takes? You ignore the conservative politics. And it sounds like, why? The whole point of the paltry self-help tips is to pull you in to this twisted conservative worldview. So no, he doesn't think it's helpful in any way, because it's just clouding somebody's ability to properly perceive things. I find this argument to be pretty much identical to that of Brandon on the Mindshift channel saying that religion, even when you can pick out some of the good stuff, is still overall such an inferior way of interacting with the knowledge that's out there in the world that it's overall still a negative. Because if you have to go to the current whatever consensus on whatever science thing and use that to evaluate how to interpret your religion, then you're just clouding your ability to just use that information in the first place, directly. Mm-hmm. And I see the same argument being made. Yes, the Bible might occasionally say something that's kind of dope, but that doesn't take away from the other problematic elements. My parents' religion, the Baha'i faith, which basically tried to do away with a lot of the problematic elements of former religions, nonetheless still believes in an Abrahamic God, which is, if you already know, the problem of evil is just, we do not want such a God to exist because he created all this suffering for very minimal joy. And people will say, oh, it's free will, but animals don't go to heaven. And there's so many more animal suffering than human suffering. So if this God exists, he's an evil God. We see no evidence for a personal God in our lives. Any definition of God gets so vague that it's meaningless to discuss. And if you say that there's a metaphysically true God and a spiritual plane and all of this crap, no matter how much you dress it up, that's not true. It's not true. It's demonstrably, people say oh, we can't tell for sure whether God exists or not. We can't tell for sure whether there's a creator of the universe or not, because we're not outside of the freaking universe. We don't even know how to conceive of outside of the universe, because space and time, the two things that we need to be outside of and observe don't exist outside of our universe, at least the way that we experience them. They're properties of our universe. So of course we can't know whether there was a creator, but that creator absolutely demonstrably is not a part of our lives, leading us through things, helping people out, listening to prayers and changing his all perfect, infallible mind. I mean, all of this stuff is so ridiculous, and it's so nice to hear Brandon be able to spell it out. And it has converted me away from the religious centrism I had to being not as extreme, like anti-religion that it needs to go to violence, but like definitely anti-religion in the sense that I don't think it's as good as any other thing. I think it's best if you can overcome it. And people love to talk about all the problematic verses in Islam and say that's why their cultures are problematic. Let me tell you, there are absolutely as many verses, if not more, of God being a warlord or even Jesus being a warlord. And just like Muhammad is supposedly a warlord, and that's the problem. The problem with these countries is that they are fundamentalist and extremely right-wing. And both of those things, feed into each other because they're both ultimately very authoritarian systems. And that's the problem. Not the specific religion, the fact that it gets to that point.
Well, the other thing is in places like Qatar, they have money and they have an extremely low crime rate. They have some capital punishment, but mostly because of their immense wealth, they don't have big problems with crime or anything. They have a fairly relaxed, and they don't have very much extremism either. They might fund extremist groups in other countries, but for the most part, they don't feel the need. So money is a component to whether or not there is extremism. The more poor people get, the more likely they're to turn to some spooky, father figure that doesn't exist in order to fill in the gaps in their knowledge and the mythology of behind maybe why their life is so shitty, But it's dying. Also, I have to.
Yeah, I actually have a personal story to tell about Qatar. Oh, yeah.
At least.
But it's one of those things again where it's like I don't think you can be too optimistic that religion's dying off, because it's like it doesn't just matter that it dies off. It matters how long it takes, and in proportion to the other things that are happening politically and hence environmentally. So I mean, I think it's a problem like the climate change itself that, whatever mitigating factors is still kind of something that we're dealing with. It's not the biggest problem. It's probably not as big of a problem as it was a few hundred years ago, religion, but it's unfortunately problematic. Yeah. It's kind of a bummer. But I did want to tell the story about Qatar. My dad was invited to speak there, and they wanted to look very liberal, I think, and progressive, and they invited, they accepted his speech as a very pacifist sort of like Baha'i, but they're persecuting the Baha'is. He literally, when he got there was like this other politician who was closer, and he literally got arrested on some like trumped up charge, but it was like basically because he was Baha'i.
Wow.
And my dad was like kind of looking over his shoulder the whole time, like, are they going to arrest me too? Also, they used literal slave labor to build their World Cup. So, I mean, I just want to say, like, as far as like money goes, like, same problems with authoritarianism. It's just like not very cool.
If people are poor, then they're just going to fight with each other in the dirt. But if they have a lot of money, they'll do it more organized and put you into a prison and then put you in an electric chair or put you in a work camp. Yeah. Well, that's how it goes.
Yeah.
That's why my ultimate, motto is people are just horrible. People are horrible. If you put them under pressure, or if you don't put them under pressure.
If you put them under pressure,
some good things can happen, but a lot of times they aren't thinking clearly and make bad decisions. And then people that are extremely wealthy, they also are so self-aggrandized and egotistical and self-centered that they also become a complete drain on everything good that humans could be. And it's really only the people that are somewhere in between, modestly working, good to their neighbors, loves their family, fucking recycles, and whatever, does the very basic bare minimum to try to weave together what we call civilization and try to be good to each other and try not to piss in the well that is the environment that you live in. But it's so hard.
I think it's worth pointing out because there is a anti-anarchist mythology around the intrinsic terrible nature of humans. It's called mean world hypothesis or mean world theory, that the world is kind of out there to get you, and a belief in the mean world hypothesis leads a lot of people to conservative, more authoritarian beliefs because they think some people are just evil and that's it. And of course, we do know that people are very, very influenced by their environments, to the point that when systems dynamicists are looking at a system, one of their fundamental axioms is to assume that each human is acting in rational self-interest at every given moment and making what is available to them the most logical decision at any given point. The reason why they make this assumption is because human beings are remarkable problem solvers. And whenever there is freedom and autonomy within a system, you're able to do a lot more with fewer people than in totally rigid, hierarchical, authoritarian systems, which is why a lot of work environments will have this sort of pseudo-anarchism where you don't really have a boss, but like there's still kind of like somebody with more power. It's this kind of hybrid situation. The hybrid situation exists not because companies are secretly leftist. It's because it works. It's fine. The anarchist argument for why we don't need authority is that the vast majority of daily interactions taking place between people are happening without any direct coercive threat. Most people are just trying to live their lives. And those who are already in a situation where they're doing more subversive or violent activities, it's not the authoritarianism of cops that's going to like keep them from being problematic for certain other people in society or whatever. We already know that doesn't really happen.
Yeah, the mathematician is John Nash, and he was what The Beautiful Mind was based off of. And he had this game called Fuck You, Buddy, where you'd give one side a diamond, the other side's got money, and you say, okay, we're not gonna meet, but you need to leave the money in the trash can or whatever, and I'll come pick it up and I'll give you the diamond. So the situation was put in a way where you had a choice. You could do the exchange, or, which you might lose the diamond or you might get the money. But you had the opportunity to steal the diamond and the money. And every time they found that the men in the project, all the mathematicians at the place, would choose to fuck over the other person rather than take the chance that the other person fucks them over. But when they tested the women in the building, they found the exact opposite, that the women were way more likely to want to play along and assume the best of the other person and gave the other person a chance or whatever. So it is a spectrum of behavior that we exist in society. So you have people that are really willing to take advantage of everybody, who are highly motivated, slightly sociopathic, self-proclaimed alpha males. And then you have people in the middle who are just sort of, sometimes they take big risks or do something, egotistical, but most of the time they're pretty much humbled to their place in the hierarchy and their place in the world. And then you have, of course, people who are overly empathetic, have no money, have that's me.
I mean, it's actually kind of an interesting point you bring up, because it almost feels like you are ascribing a little bit more individual variation to people's behavior as opposed to the combination of various environmental and social factors. Perhaps I'm misreading that.
No, I mean, it's all part of it.
It's kind of interesting if we...
Just one component of it is also, things like gender, things like the weather.
Because the thing about the John Nash thing, the thing about that is that so actually they actually used computers back in like the 50s to be able to test different mathematical algorithms for playing these sort of prisoner dilemma games. And they had different mathematicians come up with different, and they put it in the computer and they play several iterations of like 1,000 rounds or whatever, so that they're able to get like a lot of data and a lot more than if you just had a person doing it. But you have one program that's like, tit for tat. If you harm me, I'm gonna harm you. But they have variations. Some, as soon as the flip is switched, they're only going rebuttal for the rest of the game. Some, they'll forgive. They're programmed to forgive. Tit for tat, but the next round, you won't assume that you need to fight back or whatever again. Just one. And there are all sorts of different variations of this. And so what's very I actually think there's a Veritasium video about this too, because what's very interesting is that the most effective strategy for playing the game, can you guess? Because you do have the problem. This is the prisoner's dilemma to begin with. If you're too aggressive and the other person's aggressive, you both fare worse than had you cooperated. But if you go in wanting to cooperate and the other person fucks you over, then they can have more than if you had cooperated. This is the fundamental thing. So yes, it does make sense in the psychology of how like men are sort of raised to be extra aggressive. But it's also human nature to learn from logical systems that we're able to create and hopefully integrate that into our systems. So what was the most effective strategy for beating the prisoner's dilemma?
Sure, being nice.
It was the one where because then you're gonna get screwed over. The best strategy is assume nice at first, do one tit for tat with forgiveness after a turn. Did you do the balloons? That's hilarious. Did someone else do that?
How did you do that? Did you say tit for tat?
Tit for tat.
How did you do that?
I don't know, dude. I just thought like, it was so happy that I'd shared the secret of getting along or whatever. But
that was epic.
So it's kind of interesting. So mathematically, we actually know because we can see. So what happens in those games? There's all these other games where like as soon as one thing does it, and they have some where it's like it'll randomly be bad or whatever. So if the random fucking over interacts with the only plays nice, it'll end up defeating everyone for the rest of the line. But if you have one that's too aggressive back, just for the rest of it, they're going to keep being aggressive. But you can prove mathematically that if you want a system that has the best outcomes for everybody, you need to assume good at first. It's kind of like innocent until proven guilty concept. And you need to do a tit for tat that's non-expansive, that's only proportional, and that has this element of forgiveness and reset after the thing is made.
Well, that's what the corporate executives guys do or whatever. They go give you a compliment sandwich, right? They go, you're a great worker. You might need to work a little harder in this area, but other than that, you're really nice. And then that's like the absolute best way to get through to human beings in a way. It's communicative. I don't know. That sounds right to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that is an interesting. I see the parallel you drew, the triangle where it's like, your optimism and then your negative or whatever. Maybe it's this way. I don't know, but yeah,
that sounds about right.
I got you, man. Yeah. So where does all of this leave us? Do you feel better? Do you feel improved? Do you feel therapized? Or do you feel worse? Did I not sufficiently lift you up?
Oh, I feel good. I feel better. I had a rough day. I was yelling at people. Yeah, I had a good day. I had a good time talking with you. It's always kind of cathartic when you come on and you let it all out and you learn something new and you hear somebody else talk and tell you a story. And And we learned a lot. We actually had to learn some new Bible verses and everything like that. It's kind of exciting.
Yeah, you have me on. I'm going to be talking about physics, economic, political theory. We're going to be talking about history. We're going to be talking about radioactivity. And we never even talk about music. No, we do sometimes, but
we do sometimes. Ecological design.
My actual field of expertise. My actual field of expertise isn't as interesting to people. How to play improv cello really well.
Playing it is always better. That's true. People could talk about music. I used to watch music documentaries until I realized I just like the music. I don't know if I need to hear an hour and a half about how some guy was so great. Music is like...
Well, documentaries suck, but I love watching interviews with musicians, like great musicians. I learned so much from that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, especially when they're talking about music.
Yeah. And I also feel a little bit like music and politics are a bit like oil and water, and that they don't mix with each other that well. Now, that being said, I have some music coming out that I can hype up, I guess, in this podcast that is a bit more explicitly political, but not for the sake of being political. It just fits the song. So that's kind of where I'm coming at it more from I care about the music perspective. But one thing that I did do with my most recent upload, and I think this was nice, is I just wrote a little essay, like 1,500 words. You gotta have it fit in the YouTube description, but it's like, look, if you want, and I also was able to just copy and paste it into the subtitles thing. So like, if you want, you can watch the music video that I just put out, turn on subtitles, and then you'll see like a story about it. But it's like, it's there beneath, it's like, it's not the main focus, you know? It's kind of like, I was inspired, I guess, by how Primitive Technology does it, where like he puts these very descriptive descriptions and like has subtitles for what he's doing, but otherwise he's not talking in his videos. You just enjoy the sound of leaves crunching and stuff.
The ambiance.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I'm trying to bridge it. Honestly, I love coming on here, and I think that people who think, oh, maybe Justin has some interesting takes, will just come over to your channel, and it's fine. I'll probably cross promote this podcast on my page anyway.
You should.
Especially this one. I think this was a good episode.
I think so too. It was really concise. But yeah, well, if everybody who's listening, go and check out his page. Is Justin Psychedelic Cello, right? Am I missing the word? No, that's right.
No, I couldn't decide which I wanted, so I smooshed together my real name and the stage name I like. So it's Justin Leopard, like the animal but no O, and then Psychedelic Cello, which is how I play it, you know.
Yeah, Justin Leopard, Psychedelic Cello. Yeah, this is great music, great videos, great content. Hell of a cello player, amazingly fast fingers. Yeah, well, you know what? We'll do a show one day when you're in town, or if you get better internet, and then we can do the other app, and we'll do like another good quality cello recording. I would love that. It's just so hard, you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it would be nice if we could play something together. Because like I already have videos of me playing cello that people can watch, but it's like, for it to be special for the podcast, it would be nice if there's something specific to us about it.
Can I play guitar?
Something to think about, maybe. Maybe there's like a song I can play on, or...
Yeah, if I record a song.
Yeah, we should. Maybe we'll do it. And we can do it where like you can give yourself multiple takes. I can give myself multiple takes for my part, and then we just play it at the top of the podcast. It's a little collab, just specific for the video.
That's a good idea.
Sounds nice.
Yeah. Well, look, everybody, we'll sign off to you, and we're going to talk right after this. So I want everybody out there to have a really nice time, treat people nicely. But if they don't answer your emails right away, yell at them and tell them that they are snubbing you and you don't like it. And then, yeah. And go vegan, because the animals would love that. The environment would love that. We'll do more existential crises, I think, next week. We'll do it again. Anything you want to add before we go?
I just wish everybody the best of energy, and I hope that you're able to find, something extra special today or soon from these thoughts.
Yeah. Or just in general. Maybe go for a walk, see a bird, if that turns you on. Something to make you happy. All right, folks. We'll see you next time.
Just in general, reporting for duty.
Chris Jeffries, over and out. Get